Welcome back to part 2 of our discussion about China and getting an understanding of what's going on with China and how that impacts the global economy. So stay tuned. Another interesting dynamic to this too is, besides sort of their kind of domestic politics and expansion, they've been really aggressively pursuing markets in places like Africa and things like that. Securing mineral rights and things like that. They've been very aggressive going into some of these more developing areas and staking a presence out ahead of a lot of the European and Western nations.
Yes.
What do you think? What do you think's going on there?
Yeah. So again, this is part and parcel of Xi's more proactive foreign policy. He announced I think it was 2013, One Belt, One Road, which eventually became known as the Belt and Road Initiative. And that's this sort of, let's recreate the old Silk Road concept of trade. And that will also sort of parlay itself into geopolitical relationships, military bases and outposts, and other strategic benefits. And so he started investing in, lending to, and increasing trade with all of these countries. You mentioned Africa, the Middle East, even into Europe significantly in some Southern European and Central European countries. The Chinese have become much more active. I mean, on Africa, just to give you some sense for what they've done in Africa, they've invested over $300 billion in the last 15 years in Africa. And some of that's pure investment where they take equity stakes in a project, particularly most of their investment has basically been in infrastructure and natural resources. So they'll do equity investment in these natural resource projects to ensure secure supply of all sorts of minerals and other natural resources that are important for China, and then they give loans to these governments to build infrastructure, oftentimes required, by the way, for the shipment of these raw materials to China, but railways and ports and other important infrastructure, airports, and then they'll send in the Chinese construction companies and transportation, railway producing companies, and so they'll get Chinese job generation out of it. Excess capacity from these Chinese companies can be effectively, in some ways, shipped to Africa or these other countries that they're working with in Asia, Burma, Malaysia, etc. And then they have this sort of relationship that suddenly becomes quite disentangleable, because you have a debt profile and a debt relationship, which makes it difficult for these African countries to extract themselves. And so there's been a lot of criticism now of China, including the fact that these Chinese projects, they're not setting up manufacturing plants to a great extent and employing Africans at a high level. Chinese employment of African labor in Africa through Chinese investment is like 1.75 people to $1 million of investment. It's much in the rest of the world. It's like 2.3 or 2.4. It's much higher. So there's it's an unsustainable level where you get all this backlash from local populations, and eventually, after the initial euphoria and the honeymoon period, that the governments appreciate all this investment, then they start to get frustrated as the local population's not getting employed or treated the right way. So the Chinese are going through a very similar evolution as other Western powers have in terms of investing in these developing countries, but they're using it to their advantage. I have a friend who works for the U.S. government at USAID who does a lot in this space, and he says that the Chinese are going to these countries, where the U.S. has pulled back considerably from a financial standpoint, but they're still offering sort of governance and other consulting services, and saying, hey, democratic values work, and there are other things we can help you with. And then the government say, yeah, but the Chinese are giving us 10x what you're giving us in money.
Yeah.
And so it's a difficult game to play. Last point I would make, though, is UK and France, obviously ex-colonial powers in Africa, still invest more on a dollar basis than China. So China has grown incredibly quickly in terms of its presence in Africa, but still isn't the dominant player yet.
Well, and Russia's made some big inroads there too. So it's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out. But what you were saying about Chinese investment, just it's not just in places like Africa. It's like places like Wisconsin with the Foxconn plant where they got billions of dollars of incentives and then just nothing materialized from it. So clearly they're struggling with that globally in first world nations as well. So
that's right. It is it is a challenge for the Chinese. They're very good at doing deals where they get access to natural resources and they acquire a company. Even then, integration can be challenging sometimes. But when it's but they're not as good at the kind of public relations soft power aspect of integrating in their organizations in other jurisdictions and markets. So it's something they're trying to learn and they're getting better at, but it's going to take a while.
So, one of the things, so Sunich and I were talking, the other day in preparation for this, and, he's saying, like everywhere I go, there's some like rich Chinese people, on vacation, buying up all this stuff and, living it up and stuff like that. And, when I say, well, there's a huge middle class, it's not a surprise that they're traveling. There's a lot of money in China these days. So it's not a surprise that, there's just, a huge presence of Chinese all over the place. So I think the thing is like it comes into conflict with sort of Americans' perspective of like what China is and what Chinese people are like. What do you think that Americans should understand about China and the Chinese?
My question really was, well, what I was saying to Chris was, when I go traveling with my wife, we were in Paris for her 40th birthday, and we were going to these fancy stores. It was her show, so we're going to these stores. These Chinese ladies are buying purses that are $30, $40, $50,000. So is a middle class person in China able to afford those kind of purses? Like from an American perspective, like my perception is, man, these people are all loaded. They have so much money.
Yeah, Chinese wealth is it's hard to understand. I'll say, even having lived there for lived in China for over 10 years, I see things like that, and I'm still amazed. So you're not alone. That's the first thing I'd say. But to explain it, there has been obviously a massive rise in China's economic success and the wealth of the population in China. If you have 400 million middle or 500 million middle class Chinese, then you have 10 million super duper rich Chinese and like 100 million pretty rich Chinese. And so just the law of large numbers, you go to Paris and you see all these Chinese, because that's a drop in the bucket of the total population of China. That's number one. Number two, Chinese love conspicuous consumption. And this is not unique to China. Most cultures that go through these rapid economic development phases, when you get a using the old French phrase, the nouveau riche base of consumers that haven't had stuff and then suddenly can afford it, the natural inclination is to be conspicuous in your consumption. That's not unusual. And actually, since the anti-corruption campaign, you've seen a little bit of that kind of dissipating because it's less politically popular to be so conspicuous. But that's a natural evolution for any country going through what China has been through. And then the third thing I'd say is Chinese tax rates. This is a bit nichey, but Chinese luxury taxes, for example, and just the prices that companies like Louis Vuitton charge in China historically have been sky high. So between the luxury tax and just the price that these companies know that they can charge, you can finance your trip to Paris, all expenses included, by going and buying those bags in Paris. And so because the price differential is that significant.
Wow.
And then there's probably one other element of what you're seeing there. Most of the consumption there is for self, but sometimes you'll have, there's actually a pretty healthy trade of arbitrage trade, not just in luxury handbags, but in cosmetics out of Korea and other jurisdictions and other products, where Chinese will go and then they'll bring them back on shore and sell them for a higher price because they can get them cheaper in those countries. And so, and then actually the last aspect that a lot of these companies have to be careful about is a lot of these buyers will come in order to take handbags back to copy them and sell fake versions in China. So there's a lot of reasons why there's there's rich Chinese people in Paris buying expensive handbags, but the bulk of it is just legitimate. There's just legitimately been a lot of wealth created, on my album, the second song on my China rap album, the Red Print album website that was mentioned is a song called Billionaire. And you know the old Bruno Mars song, Travie McCoy song, I want to be a billionaire, so freaking bad, right? So I rewrote that song about the nouveau riche in China, and it kind of explains the culture around splashing cash and so that's that's not going to go away. Chinese are only going to get wealthier from here. And I've said to my wife, we got to get to all the hot travel spots in the world. You want to get to them now, because in 10 years, this is going to be a doubly packed,
Yeah. So what you're telling me is that Crazy Rich Asians movie is true.
It's true. And it's definitely true. And I would say, if you thought Singapore is extreme, Hong Kong is even more extreme. And there's a lot of places in China that are as well. So Crazy Rich Asians is 100% truth to that.
What is something that, you being an American living in China for this long and just learning about all the cultures, what is something that, a perception that many Americans might have that you would correct?
I would say, I don't think they want to take over the world. That's the first thing I would correct. I think they want clear dominance in the Asia Pacific region in time. And I think they want respect as an equal superpower on the global stage. That's probably their ambition at this point. And you can be a little sympathetic to that, to the fact that they are the second largest country in the world. They are the largest country in their region. And, if the United States had Chinese bases in, let's say Hawaii wasn't American, they had Chinese bases in Hawaii and Mexico, because they had an alliance with Mexico, and they had Chinese spy planes flying off the coast of San Diego to run, espionage and intel collection missions. The United States probably wouldn't like that either. And so there's a justifiable sense of, we want to reestablish dominance and control in the region around us. Now, what's illegitimate about that is the Chinese haven't proven that they're able or willing to engage on a global governance basis and a kind of a global stakeholder model where they're treating other countries in a way that is reasonable and according to the rules of the game. They want to rewrite some of those rules. And so most countries are not comfortable with China taking on that. Vietnam, another fellow communist country, not very friendly with China and is actually butting up to the United States for that reason. So the Chinese would need to change how they approach their fellow Asian peers in order for them to get more acceptance there. But they don't really see the United States global order as one they want to sort of fully commit to or buy into. So one can accept that. Look, we understand a little bit why they're doing what they're doing, but maybe the way that they're doing it is not exactly a way that we're comfortable with or other countries are. The second thing I'd say that is a misperception is people think of China as this, authoritarian one-party system, very communist. Again, from a lifestyle standpoint, you go there, you wouldn't notice 95% of the time that you're in a communist country. You'd feel like you're in a capitalist, democratic, maybe not democratic, but in a capitalist country. You wouldn't notice the politics unless you saw sort of the military soldiers guarding a few things here and there, but very little presence. And the second thing about this one-party state is I think oftentimes they all think the same. That we even analysts like myself who understand this a bit more will lazily say the Chinese. Well, in fact, yes, it's a one-party state, but there are factions within that political party. A lot of voices, different points of view, and a lot of political infighting. I mean, if House of Cards would look like Sesame Street compared to Chinese politics. So there's a lot of intrigue and back channel fighting and conflict in the Chinese system. And then the last thing I'd say is, there's a lot of headline conflict between the United States and China right now. Let's remember that on a personal level, like person to person, the Chinese and Americans historically have gotten along phenomenally well. And there's a lot of comment, like Chinese are super entrepreneurial. They're very optimistic. They're very friendly. They're super welcoming. And some of my best Chinese friends are as loyal and as close to me as any friends I have, from the United States or elsewhere. And so they're fantastic people. And so we have to be able to hold, and this is very difficult, especially in our world of kind of social media echo chambers, we have to be able to hold contradictions in our hands at the same time, that we can disagree with the Chinese government and the Chinese, but we can still love the Chinese as people and as friends and as a culture that is remarkable. So that's the other thing I'd say to remember.
So one of the things that I think that you do that's really, really interesting is you've created this rap career for yourself. You know, beyond being an economist, you've got this rap persona going on as well. But the thing that's cool about it is your songs are sort of educational for people in the U.S. to understand China better. And you've done some really interesting things. For me, there's a lot of like cultural things that are in your songs that I didn't really understand. I mean, just you have that one funny bit, about the babies with nothing blocking their bottoms, just sort of walking down the street, and if you don't like it, that's just the way it is, man.
Yeah, babies on the prowl, defecating on the pavement. I just want to scowl, saying, so why don't you save it? But that's the way it is. That's how we do it here. If y'all don't like it, you're welcome to steer clear.
Tell me about your rap career.
Yeah, man. Well, I gotta get in person.
All right.
Here, get in my persona and also represent Hong Kong here. This is the Hong Kong flag here, so I got my Hong Kong hat on.
Nice
here, but
nice.
Yeah, no. I got into rap a long time ago, kind of accidentally. I mean, I grew up with Sandish in high school playing basketball in Chicago, kind of basketball culture and hip hop in the '90s, and I was a musician, but I was a classically trained violinist. So it wasn't that relevant, but it trained me how to train my ear quite well. So how to make sounds and replicate sounds and understood rhythms and things. And then I got a little bit more into rap, and then started doing some parody raps just for fun for my university and for some, school events and then work events. And so when I landed in China as an economist, I thought, there's so much stuff that I'm learning and reading about and writing about. Why not make a song or two about it? And so my first one I wrote was about Beijing. And, this is a city where I'd been a student learning Chinese and then returned as a professional. And I just wanted to write an ode to kind of the city I grew up in China. So I used Jay-Z's Empire State of Mind and wrote it about Beijing State of Mind, did a video, and it was super fun. And then that ended up turning into a 21-track album of songs all about Chinese kind of political culture, social culture, and the economy. And it was largely focused on kind of the last 10 years during Xi Jinping's, rise and reign, and explaining what was happening in modern day China, because so much change was happening, way more than had happened in the previous decade or two. And rap is such a great way, music in general, but in particular, rap is such a great format for storytelling and education, because not only is it memorable because you have these famous, I did parody, so I would cheated. I use famous rap songs everybody knows. But rap is so much faster in terms of lyrical production than a regular song. Yeah. So you can tell in 3 or 4 minutes, you can get into a lot of detail on like China's economic business, economic model, or policies around 5-year plans, or anti-corruption campaign, or, how multinationals are faring in the anti-monopoly campaign, like really weird, geeky stuff. And then on the social side, how do Chinese youth deal with the challenges, both men and women, gender issues, educational issues. There was a song about pollution, Tupac's Changes, all about how Chinese people want to change in the environment. And so there was so much to do. I wrote probably 5 or 6 songs about Xi Jinping and his anti-corruption campaign and who he was as a leader for the Chinese people. So it was just a fun way to kind of express what I was learning about, and hopefully create a platform for people to, as you say, to kind of learn about China and do it in a fun way. So I know a bunch of university professors who have, started using it in the classroom, and that was kind of the idea, is just to use it as a medium.
So I guess the bottom line is, if you want to understand China, you want to be prepared for the global economy of the future, you got to go to the redprintalbum.com and listen to the whole album there, and you'll be a Chinese expert.
There's actually on that website, I will say, so it's mostly about China, but if you're not interested in China, there's a bonus rap video that I wrote about Trump when he was running in 2016. So a little crisscross, jump parody for all those 1990s rap fans. So go check it out.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, I got to say thank you so much for coming here and sharing your wealth of knowledge about China. Really appreciate it. I think it's important for Americans to really get a better understanding of what's happening in Asia, because it is important, and it is the things that are happening there are significant, and I think it's great to see another global power rise and people improving their lives and creating incredible things, becoming entrepreneurs. I think that in the end, we're all going to benefit from that. So excited about it.
I think you're right. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah.
As each side figures the other out, but I do think there's a lot of benefit to a stronger China if we can work through those complications. And to your point, we as Americans need to. There's been such a multi-decade self-perception of Americans as number one.
Right.
That I think we need to sort of recognize, like, it's okay not to be the only ones up there, and just because there's other people doing well doesn't mean we're not.
Yeah, it's not a zero-sum game.
It's not a zero-sum game. Yeah.
That's right. Awesome. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, hit that like button, click on that subscribe button, because that helps out a ton. And if you want to get notifications when we post new content, click on that bell icon, and I'll see you in the next video.